January has been a wild month for the stock market, and for me, as I launched this channel and started covering the market every single day. So whether you're a new viewer catching up on what you missed, or a long-time subscriber looking to relive the biggest moments, this video's got you covered. So grab some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy this full recap of everything that happened in the markets this month. Here's everything you need to know about the stock market today, summed up in just 1 minute. Let's dive in. Today is January 2nd, I'm Daniel, and this is Stock Market Recap. The stock market was overall red, with the S&P dipping 0.2%, the Nasdaq declining 0.16%, and the Dow falling 0.33%. The pre-market was looking very green, however, the market ended up plummeting at around noon. Now moving on to some headlines. Up first, we had Tesla reporting their delivery numbers this morning, which came in below expectations, which sent their stock down 7%. The street wanted a total of 505,000 car deliveries, while Tesla only reported 475,000, slightly short of expectations. I'm not gonna lie, this dip is looking pretty juicy. Speaking of a dip, this morning, KBW downgraded their price target on SoFi all the way down to a whopping $8, around half of what it's trading at right now, which sent the stock down nearly 10%. Despite all the red, Nvidia managed to close up over 3%, which is quite promising. Overall, pretty rough start for the new year, but that could all change tomorrow. This was Stock Market Recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Here's everything you need to know about the stock market today, summarized in just 1 minute. Let's get into it. I'm your host Daniel, and welcome back to Stock Market Recap. Today, the stock market had an incredible rally, with the S&P rising 1.2%, the Dow picking up 1/8%, and the Nasdaq gaining a solid 1.8%. However, even with today's rally, stocks are still down for the week. One of the biggest losers was actually Apple, so let's talk about them. Apple stock surged 15% to its high of $260 since the election. Although this drop could suggest concerns about valuation, given Apple's high PE, I personally think that investors are just taking profits. Switching over to a more positive topic, Nvidia's stock has been on an incredible run the past few days, closing up nearly 5% today at a price of $145. On some other news, electric vehicle maker Rivian had an amazing day after reporting better than expected car deliveries, which sent the stock up a staggering 25%, which was its biggest one-day gain as a publicly traded company. Overall, today was a great day for the markets. Let's see if we can hold these prices next week. This was Stock Market Recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next week. Semiconductor stocks are on the rise today, and Nvidia is finally back to 150. Let's analyze it. Today is January 6th, and this is Stock Market Recap. Stocks had a strong day today following Friday's rally, with the S&P rising 0.5%, the Nasdaq rising 1%, and the Dow ending essentially flat, being down only 0.06%. Now, all three of them were trading at much higher levels earlier in the day, but got sold off later into the close. Highlight of the day, however, was the semiconductor sector, with some notable mentions being Nvidia at 3.4% up, AMD at 3.3% up, and Micron at a stunning 10.4%. What a run. Now, you might be thinking, what could have caused such a rally? Well, earlier in the morning, we got results from a Taiwanese chip company by the name of Foxconn, which reported better than expected numbers. This actually helped boost Taiwan's semiconductor stock to its all-time highs today, up a fabulous 6%. Also, Nvidia has a meeting later in the day where CEO Jensen Huang could give us some info on the future of their company, which, by the way, I will be covering on this channel, so stay tuned. That just about wraps it up. Hope you enjoyed this semiconductor-focused episode of Stock Market Recap, and make sure you subscribe to not end up like Intel stock. Nvidia stock just had its worst day in over 4 months, and the rest of the market is tanking. What's going on? Let's break it down. I'm Daniel, and you're watching Stock Market Recap. Stocks were bloody red today, with the S&P dipping 1.1%, the Nasdaq dropping 1.8%, and the Dow being down 0.4%. Nvidia suffered its biggest loss since September 5th, down 6%, right after hitting all-time highs in the pre-market. What a shame. So let's analyze what happened. First off, this morning we got JOLTS data, which showed us that there are way more jobs than we expected. Although this might sound good on paper, this is actually bad news. You see, low unemployment can lead to inflation, which is not good for this market because we are highly dependent on the Fed cutting rates this year. If inflation is too high, the Fed will not be able to cut. Also, this morning we got inflation numbers from Europe, which showed a spike in inflation. This could potentially mean that the CPI report could follow a similar route and come in hotter than expected, which wouldn't be good for investors. And because of that, the market got sold off due to fear of JPOW not cutting enough times. Back to Nvidia though, they had their SES speech yesterday, which in my opinion went really well. However, as with most events similar to these, Tesla Robotaxi, the stock gets sold off in a sell the news event. Now, do I think it deserved to slide 6%? No, but that's what the market gave it. Palantir had a rough day as well, dumping a whole 8%. This could obviously be over valuation concerns, given Palantir's ridiculous PE of over 300, but it could also be a certain someone. That's all I have for today. Let's hope we get some sort of reversal tomorrow in the markets. And make sure you subscribe, or Jim Cramer will recommend your stock next. Quantum stocks are collapsing today, with some of the big names being down 40 to 50%, and the rest of the market is trying to process the Fed's latest move. I'm Daniel, and this is Stock Market Recap. Stocks had a very volatile day, but ultimately ended slightly green, with the S&P rising 0.16%, the Nasdaq inching up 0.03%, and the Dow picking up a nice 0.25%. First off, let's talk about the Fed. At 2 p.m. today, we got something called the FOMC minutes, which basically is a report of the Fed's current views on the economy and the rate cut situation. The markets were expected to have a big move reacting to this report. However, stocks remained relatively flat. Why is that? Because quite frankly, we didn't receive any new important information. The Fed wants to continue cutting rates, but only if inflation doesn't become a problem. Therefore, the inflation report we're getting a week from now on January 15th will be extremely important for the markets. But anyway, enough about the Fed, let's talk about the big story of the day. Quantum stocks fell considerably today, with most of them being down between 40 and 50%. IONQ, for example, was down 40% today, losing nearly half of its market cap. So what happened? Now, first off, it's important to remember that all of these quantum stocks have risen significantly in the past 3 months, with most of them giving you 10x returns. Yeah, talk about a bubble. But the piece of news that caused this down momentum in the first place was Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang, who said in an interview that he thinks quantum computing is years and years away. Now, do I agree with Jensen? I'm not sure. I think it's too early to tell. However, with the quantum stocks still being up triple digits since the past month, I do think a pullback was bound to come. That's all we have time for today. Overall, pretty boring day in the markets. Tomorrow we're actually closed in observance of Jimmy Carter's passing, but I will be making a short tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow. Uber just announced a game-changing partnership with Nvidia, and Nike's trading at its lowest level in 5 years. Let's break it all down. I'm Daniel, and this is Stock Market Recap. Stocks remained relatively flat today, with the S&P closing 0% up, the Nasdaq closing 0% up. Okay, so if you couldn't tell by now, the market was closed today. But there's still a lot of things to talk about, so let's get right into it. First up, Uber is partnering with Nvidia to accelerate the development of autonomous vehicles. This is huge news for Uber, as being able to use Nvidia chips is a huge step forward on the roadmap towards autonomous vehicles. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, with Tesla's FSD being a fierce competitor. Next up, Moderna stock had a huge jump earlier in the week on a report of the first official death from bird flu in Louisiana. All I have to say about this is, let's hope we do not get another pandemic. Next up, on Wednesday, HSBC analysts downgraded AMD stock from a buy to a sell and cut its price target from 200 to 110. This sent the stock down 5%. They basically said in their report that AMD cannot compete with Nvidia, and I must say, there is some truth to that. But with how much their stock has been down lately, I think it might be bottoming out pretty soon. Up next, let's talk about Constellation Energy. For those who don't know, this is a stock in the energy sector. It's been getting some volatility the past couple days, so let's talk about what happened. To keep it short, they got an $840 million government contract. The Biden administration eased their tax credit rules for clean hydrogen producers and are nearing a $30 billion acquisition of a company called Calpine. All of this news has sent Constellation Energy, Vistra, and other stocks in the sector up a decent amount. Finally, eBay stock saw a nice jump on Wednesday as it seeks to partner up with Meta. That's all I've got for today. Overall, some really interesting stuff going on in the markets. Hope to see you tomorrow for another episode of Stock Market Recap. Stocks are plummeting after the latest jobs report, and Nvidia slides 12% in just 3 days. What caused all this? Let's break it down together. I'm Daniel, and this is Stock Market Recap. Stocks had a rough day today with the S&P dropping 1.5%, the Nasdaq dipping 1.5%, and the Dow sinking 1.6%. All three indices are now 5% down from their highs, meaning we are officially in pullback territory. So what happened? Let's discuss. This morning, we got a jobs report that showed us that unemployment edged lower, and the economy added a lot more jobs than people expected. Now again, while this might sound good on paper, this is actually pretty bad. I covered this in one of my recent shorts. If you didn't watch it, go check it out. But to sum it up, more jobs equals more likelihood of inflation. More inflation equals less rate cuts, and less rate cuts is bad for stocks. Nvidia got a lot of the bearish momentum recently, with the stock dropping an astounding 12% in just 3 days, losing a total of 440 billion market cap. I personally think that there's a lot of panic selling going on right now, but we will see how things play out once the inflation report comes out on January 15th. Next up, let's talk about Constellation Energy. Their stock was up 25% today after they completed their $30 billion acquisition of Calpine. After all the good news lately, their stock is now up more than 30% just for the week. If you'd like some more info on the other good news, make sure to check out my other short. And finally, let's talk about Nike. So yesterday I said this, and Nike's trading at its lowest level in 5 years. Yeah, I kind of forgot to record that segment, but we're doing it now. Nike stock is at a rock bottom, trading at 5-year lows. So Nike, just like any company, reported earnings 4 times in 2024. And although their numbers were alright, the stock fell every single time. Nike's definitely one of the most oversold stocks in this market, although the business does have its problems. So Nike's actually dealing with declining sales right now, especially in China, where their revenue is falling 8% year over year. This, along with many other concerns, are leading investors to sell the stock because they simply don't believe in the business in the short term. I think it's definitely an interesting stock to follow, but personally, I don't see a reason for buying it right now. That's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Earnings season is here, and we're starting off with the banks. This is Stock Market Game Plan. Let's dive in. We have a pretty packed week ahead of us, with some key inflation reports and a variety of earnings. Starting us off on Tuesday, we have Producer Price Index data, or PPI, in the morning. This will give us an insight into Wednesday's more important inflation report, and will likely move the markets. On Wednesday, we have the more important inflation report, the CPI report, which will definitely move the markets. Along with that, we have big bank earnings from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, BlackRock, and Wells Fargo, as well as a few others. This is important for the broader market as well, as good earnings from the banks could indicate a good Q4 from other companies. On Thursday, several other banks report, including Bank of America and Morgan Stanley. We'll also be hearing from Taiwan Semiconductor, which will be extremely important for the semiconductors. If the earnings don't disappoint, it could give the broader market a nice boost. We also hear from United Health, which I think will be interesting to hear from, as they will likely reveal how they plan to move forward with the recent CEO assassination. And that just about wraps up the stock market game plan for next week. If you're new here, stick around for my daily stock market recaps, posted every weekday. Hope you enjoy, and I'll see you tomorrow. TikTok is most likely getting banned in the US, and insurance stocks are down after the California fires. Let's break it down. The stock market was mixed today, with the S&P inching up 0.16%, the Nasdaq dipping 0.3%, and the Dow gaining a nice 0.8%. The morning was actually looking extremely red, but we saw the majority of stocks get bought up during the day, leading the S&P to close green. The stocks that weren't very green were the insurance stocks, with companies like Lemonade and Mercury General falling between 20 and 30% in just 5 days. This definitely has something to do with the fires that we've seen in California. By the way, if you're interested in how the fires could affect the rest of the market, I'll have a video on that coming out soon. Moderna suffered a 16% loss today after announcing that the demand for their vaccines has gone down. I guess investors aren't convinced that bird flu will become a thing. Next up, let's talk about Macy's and Kohl's. Both of them have had rough weeks due to announcing lots of bad news, which includes store closings and a warning of weak holiday sales from Macy's. Finally, let's cover the TikTok ban. So at this point, it's pretty much confirmed that TikTok is shutting down in the US. But what could this mean for the market? Well, in my opinion, this is really good news for Meta and Google. This is because former TikTok users will likely move to Instagram and YouTube for their content. Both platforms could see a large inflow of new users, which would obviously give a huge boost to both companies' growth. And that's about it for today. This was Stock Market Recap. I hope you enjoyed. The inflation report this morning brought huge volatility to the markets, and the inflation report tomorrow could spice things up even more. I'm Daniel, and you're watching Stock Market Recap. Stocks had a very volatile day today, but ultimately closed out flat, with the S&P inching up 0.1%, the Nasdaq dipping 0.1%, and the Dow gaining 0.5%. So this morning, we got the highly anticipated PPI report, which actually came in below expectations, meaning inflation was down, and because of this, the pre-market was very green. Then throughout the day, stocks had very unpredictable movements, most likely due to fear and uncertainty about tomorrow's CPI report. Along with the inflation report tomorrow, we also have several earnings reports from big banks. This will definitely be important for the broader market. If we get good numbers, the indices can get a nice boost. I'll keep you guys updated on that tomorrow. Next up, let's talk about Eli Lilly. Their stock was down a whopping 6% today after cutting revenue forecasts. The stock is now trading at its lowest level since May. Their CEO also talked about how it'll be difficult for their company to work with the Trump administration, which is pretty concerning, but I guess we'll see what happens from here. Meta was the worst performing Magnificent 7 stock today, so let's talk about them. So earlier today there were some rumors that TikTok might be getting bought out by a US company, and that wouldn't be good for Meta because then they can't get TikTok users to move to their platform. That's just about it for today. Tomorrow will be a very important and exciting day in the markets, and you're not going to want to miss it. This was Stock Market Recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bank earnings are in, and they've set the market on fire. Let's break it down. Starting off with the main highlight, we have Goldman Sachs, who reported an incredible quarter, beating EPS by 44% and reporting an extra $1 billion of revenue. These amazing numbers sent the stock up 6% today and helped out the whole sector. Next up, we have JP Morgan, who also had a great earnings, beating EPS by nearly 20%. The stock was up 2% today, and the stock price reached an all-time high. Citigroup wasn't far behind, beating on both the top and bottom line, with the stock shooting up 6%. Wells Fargo had a very slight revenue miss, but it seems like that doesn't matter, as the stock was up nearly 7%. And last but not least, Bank of New York Mellon had terrific results and was up a whopping 8% on the day. These earnings didn't just boost the sector, however, they also allowed the whole market to have a massive rally today. If you'd like more info on that, make sure to check out my daily market recap. This was earnings recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Stock market just had its best day in over 2 months, and the hugely anticipated inflation report is finally out. I'm Daniel, and this is Stock Market Recap. So first, let's cover the inflation report. Inflation data came in line with expectations, rising 2.9% year over year. This sent stocks flying in the morning, and the rally held strong throughout the day. And the S&P closed up 1.8%, the Nasdaq rallied 2.4%, and the Dow gaining a very solid 1.6%. The market had been patiently waiting for these inflation numbers, and now that they're finally out, the stress is over. The VIX confirms that, as it was down over 13% today, meaning uncertainty has gone down a lot. Additionally, most of the banks reported earnings today, with pretty much all of them beating on the top and bottom lines, driving the sector a whole lot higher. Goldman Sachs, for example, rose 6%. If you'd like a more detailed coverage on the earnings reports today, be sure to check out my earnings recap. The strong earnings reports helped boost the overall market, which, by the way, had its best day since November 6th, the day when Trump got elected. As for some more good news, Treasury yields fell significantly today after being on a steady rise for the past month. For those who don't know, bonds being down is good for equities, so this also contributed to today's rally. Finally, let's talk about quantum stocks. Last week, quantum stocks fell anywhere between 50 and 70%, and it was looking like they were dead. Although recently, there's been a reversal. All the quantum names have had an incredible run the past 2 days, so let's talk about what happened. Microsoft had a blog post where they said, quote, "It's time to get quantum ready," but also, Nvidia just today announced a quantum day at one of their events, and because of that, you saw stocks like IONQ be up 33% in one day. So overall, really nice day for the markets. While inflation remains a battle, today's report gives us a chance to breathe, at least for now. This was Stock Market Recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Taiwan Semiconductor reported earnings today, and so did 3 other big companies. Let's analyze the results. First, Taiwan Semiconductor, or TSM, reported a fantastic earnings with a slight beat on the top and bottom line, but the real highlight being the guidance, which surpassed even Wall Street's very high expectations of them. In their earnings call, they highlighted that the AI outlook remains intact in 2025. The CEO also said that the company is confident that they can work with the next administration. Their stock was initially up 6%, but ended up selling off and only closed up 4%, which is still a really nice gain. If you'd like to learn more about how this affects the rest of the semiconductor sector, make sure to check out my daily market recap. Next up, United Health had an interesting quarter. They missed very slightly on revenue, but the stock ended up selling off 6%. This most likely has to do with the uncertainty in the company after the recent CEO assassination. It'll be interesting to see how they plan to move forward from here. Morgan Stanley crushed their earnings with a whopping 27% beat on earnings per share. The market liked it as the stock went up 4%. Bank of America also reported today with a solid beat on both the top and bottom line. Their stock was essentially flat today, probably because all of the banks had a massive run up yesterday, since almost all of them had amazing quarters. That pretty much wraps up all of the earnings for today. Stay tuned for more episodes like these on days where there are a lot of earnings reports. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time. The Magnificent 7 stocks are plummeting today, and investor sentiment is at its lowest level since 2023. Let's talk about it. I'm Daniel, and you're watching Stock Market Recap. Stocks were pretty mixed today, with the indices closing red, and the S&P being down 0.2%, the Nasdaq being down 0.7%, and the Dow dipping 0.1%. Mag 7 stocks severely underperformed today, with all of them closing red. So let's talk about them. Starting off, we have Apple, who had its worst day since August 5th. And we all remember August 5th, right? So Apple got a report earlier in the day that suggested that they're struggling with iPhone sales in China. This isn't the most surprising piece of news, as Apple has had concerns with China sales for a few years now, but clearly the market didn't like this report. So Tesla was the second worst performing Mag 7, and honestly there's no news on this one, but it was up 8% yesterday, so it makes sense that it's giving up some of those gains. Nvidia is next with its 2% drawback today, and this is the one that really made no sense to me. Following TSM's great earnings, Nvidia was up around 2% in the morning. However, the stock got sold off all throughout the day, which caused it to end up deep in the red. I'll be making a video specifically talking about Nvidia very soon, so stay tuned for that. But speaking of Nvidia, let's transition into TSM, who had a fabulous earnings beat today, which sent its stock up 4%. If you'd like to know more details about TSM's earnings, make sure to check out my earnings recap. I personally think that these earnings are great for the whole semiconductor sector, but maybe the market is just being patient and waiting to see results from the one and only Nvidia, of course. Finally, there's been a report that says that investor sentiment among retail investors is the lowest it's been since November 2023, which is actually extremely interesting. That means investors aren't as bullish as it might seem. But is that a bad or good thing? Let me know down in the comments. That wraps it up for today's recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Today we're diving into a hot topic: inflation, unemployment, and the Fed's tricky balancing act with interest rates. First, let's talk about inflation. The Fed's absolute main job is to keep inflation under control. Their current target is around 2%, and although we're not there yet, we have been consistently declining. When inflation runs hot, the Fed raises interest rates to cool things down. Higher rates means that borrowing things becomes more expensive, slowing down spending, which helps ease inflation. But there is a twist, that it can also hurt the economy and job growth. So let's transition into unemployment. The Fed aims for max unemployment, and when they're hiking rates, that makes it difficult. So the situation we're having right now is that inflation has been cooling, but unemployment has remained low. This puts the Fed in a pretty tough spot, as if they cut rates too soon, inflation could bounce back. But if they wait too long, they risk slowing the economy. How do rate cuts affect the stock market? Well, lower rates are usually great for stocks, especially smaller companies, as companies can borrow cheaply, which can boost growth and profits. There is a catch here though. If the Fed starts cutting rates because the economy is weakening, which is what is sometimes called an emergency rate cut, that could be pretty bad for stocks. To summarize everything, the Fed's decisions have a massive impact on the whole economy. It's a delicate balance, and it's what keeps the economy going. Intel stock soars 10% on a rumor of a potential acquisition, and the rest of the market is getting ready for Trump's second term. Let's dive right in. The stock market had a huge day, with the S&P rising 1%, the Nasdaq rallying 1.6%, and the Dow picking up 0.8%. The Magnificent Seven led the rally, with all of them finishing in the green. This is most likely due to excitement of Trump's inauguration, happening on Monday, meaning today also marks the last stock market trading day under Biden. The market is still a couple percentage points off its all-time highs, but this week has overall been great. Intel stock posted a big 10% gain on the day after rumors emerged about the company being an acquisition target. Now, Intel is a very interesting stock, as it was actually one of the worst performing stocks of 2024, losing about 60% of its value. Could 2025 finally be Intel's comeback year? Let me know what you think in the comments. Crypto also had an incredible day, with Bitcoin hitting 105k and altcoins rallying hard. There were some reports today that Trump might create a Bitcoin strategic reserve, making crypto a national priority. If that turns out to be true, that would be absolutely massive. This Wednesday also marked the last of the major macro news. So apart from big tech earnings, the market now has some time to interpret everything that we've gotten, from all the unemployment reports to the inflation numbers. That's gonna do it for today. Great day for stocks. Let's see if we can keep up the momentum next week. This was Stock Market Recap. I hope you enjoyed.
Trump launched a meme coin and it skyrocketed 10,000% overnight. Yeah, you heard that right. So last night, Trump launched his own meme coin on Solana, and the price exploded from just 18 cents to $30 in a matter of hours, making it a mind-blowing 10,000% gain in less than 24 hours of existence. The hype around this coin is absolutely insane, with one guy on X turning $1 million into $125 million, which is absolutely wild. It crossed $8 billion of market cap earlier, officially surpassing the popular Pepe coin and entering the top 25 coins in terms of market cap. So what do you think? Are you buying Trump coin? Let me know down in the comments. Netflix stock is up 15% after hours, and Apple is down another 3%. Let's break it down. A lot happened in the markets today, but starting off, we did get an inauguration pump, with the S&P rising 0.8%, the Nasdaq gaining 0.5%, and the Dow rallying 1.2%. Apple was pretty much the only red stock today. So what happened? Well, Apple's iPhone sales fell drastically in China, down 18% in the fourth quarter. After today's drawback, the stock is now down 15% from its all-time highs. And honestly, Apple facing issues in China, that's always been a thing. I think this downwards move was definitely an overreaction, and this is looking like a solid dip to buy. Nvidia had a great day today after Trump announced a $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure. Oracle was also a beneficiary of this, as it saw a nice 7% gain today. But really, anything that has to do with AI did well today. Now on to Netflix, who rose a whopping 14% after hours, smashing past its all-time high. So Netflix did report earnings today after the close, and the numbers were absolutely amazing. I will cover specific numbers more in depth in a future earnings recap video, but they added a record 19 million subscribers in Q4. Finally, Trump actually announced some China tariffs today. However, it was only 10%, so the market didn't really care. Anyway, that just about wraps up today's recap. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Nancy Pelosi just bought these 5 stocks, and you won't believe the last one. First, she bought $500K worth of Google. It's an interesting choice, as it is probably the most undervalued Magnificent 7. Next up, we have Nvidia, another $500K in call options. This is no surprise, as Nancy has previously had Nvidia shares. The third stock is Amazon. Not much surprise here, it's a solid company. Once again, $500K worth of calls. Next up, we have Vistra. This is an interesting one, as she dropped $1 million on call options. Well, the stock was up 8% today, so she's probably up 100K today alone. The final stock is Tempest AI, which had a whopping 50% run up today, if you count the after hours. After Trump's $500 billion AI investment, including healthcare AI, exactly what Tempest does. Ironic how Nancy bought call options right before this. I wonder what kind of crystal ball she has. But anyway, what do you think? Are you buying any of these stocks? Let me know down in the comments. The stock market just had an amazing day, and the S&P 500 is back to all-time highs. So let's talk about what happened. So yesterday, Trump announced a $500 billion investment into AI infrastructure, which gave technology stocks a huge boost today and helped the whole market rally, letting the S&P to rise 0.6%, the Nasdaq to rally 1.3%, and the Dow to gain 0.3%. There were 4 big winners today, so let's break them all down. Starting off, we need to talk about Oracle and ARM. Both stocks saw massive gains today, with ARM having its best day since last year. This is because they are the core of Trump's Stargate project. Microsoft had a stunning 4% gain today, having one of its best days in quite a while. This is because they are a key partner in this project. The real winner today, though, in my opinion, was Nvidia, up 4.5% today. This is because Nvidia is the biggest AI tech company, and they benefit from any good news about AI. So a $500 billion investment definitely helps them. Guess we'll see if it can break the 150 level later this week. What do you think? Are you buying any of these stocks? Let me know down in the comments. Trump's second term is officially underway, and the markets are at all-time highs. So let's talk about what's going on. So before Trump got inaugurated, there were a lot of concerns over his policies and what he was going to do on day one. People were afraid of high tariffs, or trying to fire Jerome Powell, and other things like that. But now that he's been the president for a couple days, so far none of those things have happened, allowing the S&P to rally 0.5%, Nasdaq bumping up 0.2%, and the Dow gaining nearly a whole percent. Crypto also hasn't been doing too bad lately, with Bitcoin confidently staying above 100,000 ever since Trump got inaugurated. Trump also did say this before.
The United States will be the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we'll get it done.
And if he ends up making that Bitcoin strategic reserve, I think that could definitely create some excitement in the crypto ecosystem. One of the key earnings reports we had today was from Texas Instruments, who beat on both the top and bottom line, but lowered guidance, sending the stock down around 4% after hours. I don't think it's that big of a deal, and it should be able to recover. In general, the earnings reports we've gotten so far have been really good, which is really important for the whole market. But stay tuned for next week because we have Meta, Microsoft, Apple, and more. I'll be covering everything on my channel. This was Stock Market Recap. I hope you enjoyed. After 4 straight green days, the market has finally turned red. But is it something you have to worry about? Well, let's break it down. This week we had a lot of good news. Most notably, Trump's Project Stargate, which will be a $500 billion investment into AI. But also, the inauguration on Monday was smooth sailing, which is exactly what this market needed, which would explain why all 3 indices are on track for huge gains this week. Today, we did see a slight pullback, with the S&P dipping 1/3%, the Nasdaq losing 0.5%, and the Dow dropping 0.3%. Now, to me, this is just a typical Friday sell-off. Plus, a lot of stocks were actually green today. One of them being Novo Nordisk, as they announced strong trial results for one of their weight loss drugs, and their stock shot up 8%. The stock hasn't been doing so great lately, so it's nice to see this bounce. Another stock that managed to close in the green was actually Meta, after Zuck announced that he's planning to spend $60 billion on AI this year, and it makes sense that their stock was up nearly 2%. China's stocks also had a great day today, after Trump mentioned that he would rather not put any tariffs on China. Temu stock, for example, was up 7%. But overall, great week for stocks. Let's hope the momentum keeps up next week. This was Stock Market Recap. I'll see you next time. Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and Tesla are all reporting earnings next week, which will be super exciting. But before we get there, we've got plenty to cover from this week, so let's get straight into it. On Tuesday, Charles Schwab started us strong, with a solid beat on EPS and revenue. Their stock rallied 5% for the week. The real winner of the day, though, was Netflix, who put up amazing numbers. They beat on both the top and bottom line, but the most impressive part being their subscriber growth. The street expected 9 million subscribers, but Netflix absolutely crushed it with 19 million subscribers in the latest quarter, making it probably one of their best quarters of all time. United Airlines didn't disappoint either, with some nice numbers. The stock was up 5% on the day of their report. It did end up selling off though later into the week. Wednesday brought us Discover's numbers, who had a whopping 50% beat on EPS, sending the stock up 8% over the course of a week. American Airlines reported on Thursday with really nice beats on both the top and bottom line, but weak guidance sent their stock down nearly 8%. Later in the day, we had Texas Instruments report, who also had great numbers, but weak guidance, which led the stock to have its worst day since the COVID crash. Really interesting stuff. Next week is absolutely packed with earnings, so stay tuned for another one of these episodes. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll see you then. Apple, Tesla, Meta, and Microsoft are just some of the companies reporting next week, and Wednesday could be one of the most important days for the stock market this month. Stick around to find out why. Monday kicks things off with earnings from AT&T and SoFi. Tuesday brings us numbers from Starbucks, Boeing, and General Motors. Starbucks will be a really interesting one, as they had a volatile 2024 with many earnings surprises and a CEO switch up. It'll be interesting to hear how they're doing. Wednesday is the big day. In the morning, we get results from ASML, which is a big semiconductor name, and will definitely move the markets. And then at 2 p.m., we are getting a Fed speech, and we'll find out whether we're getting a rate cut or not. The market is expecting no cut, but Trump did recently suggest that he wants interest rates to come down. So honestly, there might be a chance of a surprise rate cut, which could send stocks rallying. Then right after the close, we get earnings from Tesla, Meta, Microsoft, and IBM. I'll be breaking down all of these reports as soon as they happen, so stay tuned for that. Apple reports on Thursday, along with Intel, UPS, MasterCard, and Visa. Apple's numbers will be really interesting, as their stock has been struggling lately. If they could show some optimism, the stock could potentially bounce back. And Intel tends to be very volatile on earnings, so that'll be a fun one to watch out for. And finally, both the oil companies Chevron and Exxon report on Friday. To close out a very exciting week, which earnings report are you most interested in? Let me know down in the comments. History was made today in the stock market. Nvidia is down 17% right now, having its absolute worst day as a publicly traded company, but also marking the biggest one-day market cap loss in the history of the stock market. But what could possibly be causing this? Let's break it down. So a couple days ago, a new Chinese AI model called DeepSeek, very similar to ChatGPT, was released to the public. And after some testing with it, it's good. But what makes it so special? So first of all, DeepSeek is an open source platform, which means the user has way more access to customizing the chatbot and can be modified to their needs, which is cool and all, but the biggest surprise was that the developers of the app claimed they only needed 6 million million to create this AI. And when you compare that to OpenAI, it seems like OpenAI is just burning money. This new Chinese innovation caused the whole tech sector to sell off massively, the overall market having its worst day since 2022. So if you're an Nvidia shareholder, what should you do? Well, in my opinion, there's no need to panic. Nvidia is still a leader in GPUs, AI, and data centers. And although DeepSeek could cause some short-term fear and panic selling, I think this could be a great opportunity to buy the dip for the long term. Although with that being said, I do think Nvidia will be very volatile for the rest of the week, and we could potentially see another big move down or up. Who knows? So what do you think? Is it time to sell AI stocks, or was this all an overreaction? Let me know down in the comments. Tech stocks are collapsing today, and Nvidia is down a whole 17%. What is going on? Let's break it down. Let's get straight into the point. Why is Nvidia down 17%? Well, I actually made a video on it, so go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. But to summarize, China released a new AI model, which is supposedly way cheaper than, let's say, what OpenAI is doing, but is also open source, meaning that the code is available to the general public. This, as many people have described it, was a wake-up call for American tech companies, as previously we didn't think much of China's technological advancements and capabilities. The indices were actually mixed today, with the S&P dipping 1.4%, Nasdaq plummeting a whole 3%, and the Dow somehow ending green, up 0.6%. Tech stocks had by far the worst day out of any sector. So let's cover some of the biggest losers, and I'll explain how it connects to the bigger picture. So if we look at the biggest losers today, the first 3 out of 4 stocks are Vistra, Constellation Energy, and GE Vernova. All of them are energy companies. The reason they all dumped this much is because their energy is required to power data centers. And if it turns out that we can make these AI models for way cheaper, the large data center builds might not be necessary. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but the market doesn't like uncertainty, and therefore all 3 stocks got sold off massively. The next 2 stocks on the list are Broadcom and Nvidia. They are the companies that actually built the data centers and AI chips. So again, if it turns out you could build an AI model for way cheaper, there might not be as much demand for Nvidia and Broadcom's products. Some other notable tech stocks on this list: Oracle being down 13%, Supermicro Computer being down 12%, Micron losing 11%, and Dell dumping 9%. Now the big question ultimately becomes, do you believe that China really made an AI model spending only $6 million? If you do, it might be time to trim some of your AI stock positions. But otherwise, today's a pretty good day to buy the dip. It'll be really interesting to see where things go tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Stock Market Recap. I'll see you next time. All aboard the Nvidia train. Nvidia's stock is up almost 9% today, following yesterday's big crash. Here's why yesterday could be a bottom for Nvidia stock. You're not going to want to miss this one. So for anyone living under a rock, yesterday Nvidia had a huge black swan event where it fell 17% after the release of the Chinese AI model DeepSeek. You could watch my other videos about it, but basically, it's a model that was made a lot cheaper and used a lot less Nvidia chips than a more traditional model like ChatGPT, sending Wall Street into panic mode and completely obliterating the tech sector. With that out of the way, here's why this could be an amazing buy the dip opportunity on Nvidia. After Trump came out and said that DeepSeek is a wake-up call for American tech companies, I think the demand for Nvidia chips could only go higher. You see, now that China has proven that they have competition over us, tech companies such as Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, etc. have an incentive to improve their technology, and pretty much every single piece of technology these days is equipped with a bunch of Nvidia chips. So if anything, this is bullish for Nvidia. But you might be thinking, well, Nvidia is already up 8% today. Isn't it too late? Well, although a nearly 10% move is a big deal, if Nvidia were to get back to the price it was before this crash, which is $142, it could still run up another 12% from here. But with Nvidia earnings coming up, I think the stock price could finally make a breakthrough to all-time highs. What do you think of Nvidia here? Are you a buyer, seller, or holder? Let me know down in the comments. The stock market made a strong comeback today, led by a massive rebound in Nvidia. Let's discuss. So after yesterday's bloodbath, the markets performed strongly today. All 3 indices were up, with the S&P closing up 0.9%, Nasdaq leading the way with a 2% green day, and the Dow gaining a solid 0.3%. Today, the market continues digesting DeepSeek's AI breakthrough and analyzing its implications for certain companies. Today, we saw many investors step in and buy the dip, which to me seems very, very bullish. If you want to know more about where Nvidia could go from here, you could check out my other video. We did have two major earnings reports today, that being General Motors in the morning and Starbucks after the close. General Motors actually crushed earnings, but the street didn't like it, probably because of Trump's recent removal of the electric vehicle mandate, which is potentially why Tesla hasn't been doing so great lately. But I'll cover their earnings more in depth in a future earnings recap. Starbucks also had great numbers, with the stock initially up 4% after hours, but ending up flat. Again, more will be said in the earnings recap. Now, tomorrow is actually a huge day for the stock market, as we get earnings from some of the biggest tech companies, including Meta, Microsoft, Tesla, ASML, and IBM. But along with that, at 2 p.m. we also get the rate cut decision, for which the market expects no cut. Jerome Powell will also be speaking at 2:30, and depending on what he says, the market could have some big moves, so be prepared. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Stock Market Recap. I'll see you next time. The Fed press conference just happened. Here's everything you need to know in under a minute. So at 2 p.m. today, the Fed announced their rate cut decision, and they decided no cut, which is fine because the market was actually pricing that in, and therefore there weren't any major moves up or down. During the press conference, Jerome Powell answered a variety of questions from reporters, and here are the main takeaways. First of all, Jay Powell made it clear that he's going to stick with his own plans. So although Trump did recently say that he demands interest rates go down, Jay Powell basically just said, I don't care. He also sounded really confident when talking about the macro. He did also get asked about a potential March rate cut, and he didn't really give us a definitive answer, stating that it depends on a lot of things, including the next inflation report or any Trump policies. But the fact that he didn't deny it is bullish. So overall, the press conference went very well. But how did stocks react to this? Well, all three indices are red, but they did bounce back nicely from the intraday lows. And that's gonna do it. I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, consider subscribing. I'll see you next time. Meta, Microsoft, and Tesla all reported earnings today, so let's break it all down. Let's start with Microsoft, as they probably had the most impactful earnings. Microsoft beat very slightly on the top and bottom line, but the stock fell 4% after hours. Now, there's a couple explanations to this. The most obvious reason, their cloud revenue was a miss, but also on their earnings call, they were questioning the need for mega capex spend after the whole DeepSeek situation, since maybe they don't need to spend as much money on Nvidia chips. This sent Nvidia slightly lower after hours. Nvidia was also down 4% today. More on that later. Let's move on to Meta now. Meta also reported a beat on the top and bottom line. Meta stock was very volatile in the after hours, but ended up going green. Honestly, Meta had a great quarter, and none of their numbers really shocked me. I think it definitely could have gone up more if not for the DeepSeek concerns. Finally, moving on to Tesla, which had a double miss. Yikes. But of course, Tesla shares were up 4%. Why wouldn't they be? Elon managed to sound super optimistic during the earnings call because the numbers, yeah, they're not so great. The question with Tesla is always, do you view it as a car company, or do you believe in Elon's future for Tesla? That's up for you to decide. There were some other earnings reports today, which I'll cover later in an earnings recap. But the other big event we had today was the Fed meeting, which I talked about in further detail in this video, but basically it went really well, and Jay Powell didn't sound hawkish at all. With all that being said, the indices were slightly red today. The S&P closing down 0.4%, the Nasdaq dipping 0.5%, and the Dow losing 0.33%. This sell-off was mostly led by Nvidia, which was down another 4% today after Monday's catastrophic $600 billion market cap loss. I gotta be honest here, Nvidia's future is looking a little uncertain after all the DeepSeek stuff, and we all know how the market treats uncertainty. But Nvidia definitely isn't going anywhere. Guess we'll have to see what the earnings call about a month from now brings us. That's gonna do it for today. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Stock Market Recap, and I'll see you tomorrow. Apple just reported earnings, and Trump announced a new set of tariffs. This is Stock Market Recap. Let's get right into it. The market had a strong day today, with the S&P closing up 0.5%, the Nasdaq gaining 0.25%, and the Dow inching up 0.3%. Microsoft stood out as one of the only red stocks, so let's talk about them. So Microsoft reported earnings yesterday, and the numbers were great. The only big miss they had was cloud revenue, but honestly that's not too big of a deal. So to me, this dip makes no sense. But speaking of earnings, today's earnings highlight was Apple. Apple did beat on the top and bottom line, but iPhone revenue was down 11% in China. That does seem like a problem, and shares were initially down around 2%, but after Tim Cook cooked on the earnings call, the stock ended up bouncing and ended up 3%. Now transitioning over to the Trump tariffs. Trump said he's planning to put 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico. The indices briefly dipped into the red, but quickly recovered most of their gains. And finally, OpenAI just received a massive investment from SoftBank, pushing their valuation past surpassed $300 billion, which is pretty crazy. This could be some good news for Nvidia, since a chunk of that money will likely go towards their AI chips, and it's most likely why we saw Nvidia rally sharply into the close. But that's gonna do it for today. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Stock Market Recap. I'll see you next time.
We'll be announcing the tariffs on Canada and Mexico.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
So Trump just hit Canada and Mexico with a 25% tariff, and the stock market doesn't like it. The markets were initially having a really strong rally today, but at around noon, as soon as Trump announced the tariffs, we took a huge dump, and the indices went deep in the red, with the S&P closing down 0.5%, the Nasdaq losing 0.2%, and the Dow dipping 0.7%. The selling pressure did continue to after hours, with the S&P dropping another 0.5%. As an investor, should you be worried about this? Well, kind of. We don't really know the full implications of these tariffs, so it's okay to feel a little worried, but there isn't really a reason to sell anything. These tariffs could turn out to be just fine. We will see how they play out in the next few months. On some other news, Trump did also meet with Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang today, and while we don't really know exactly what they talked about, there's a good chance they discussed some tariffs and AI policy, stuff like that. These are obviously very important things for Nvidia and for the rest of the market, so if we get more details on that, I'll keep you guys updated. So what do you think of the tariffs? Are you a fan of them, or will they harm the economy? Let me know down in the comments. That's gonna do it. If you made it to the end, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the support lately. It means a lot. I'll be doing another one of these next month, and I hope to see you there.